Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation? The podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Ralf Specht. Ralf Specht is the author of Building Corporate Soul. He developed the Soul System, a framework that powers culture and success for any business. After 2 decades with McCann Erickson in various executive roles, he was a founding partner of Spark 44, an innovative, industry-first joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover. Under his leadership as CEO, Spark 44 grew to a 1,200-person business in 18 countries. His second book, Beyond the Startup, shares the operational innovations that drove Spark 44's growth before it joined forces with Accenture. His driving vision is to make soulless companies a thing of the past. Ralf, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited about this conversation. You've had such an amazing career, and I can't wait to talk to you about innovation and how it has shaped your journey.
Well, Jared, thank you very much for having me on the show. I think innovation is a wonderful topic, actually, because when you're in business, and obviously I've been in business for quite a while, being at the end of my 50s, there's been innovation in lots of areas, and it's been there all the way through. So I'm really excited to be on the show and have a conversation about it.
Thank you very much. Let's dive right in. What, in your mind, is innovation?
Well, I think innovation is about introducing something new, right? Something that hasn't been done or hasn't been there before. And probably an example that you've heard too often for that is the Apple iPhone, because obviously that was a completely new category that was opened up. It's been innovation that's shaped and impacted millions of lives across cultures, and technology for the better, I think, for everyone who's been capable of using.
Right. I love that definition because it's so elegant. Just the introduction of something new. A lot of times people bring a lot of, I'll call it baggage, to a definition of innovation. You know, it has to be technology driven. It has to be new to the entire world. It has to be this, it has to be that. But introducing something new, I think, is really the core of what innovation is.
Yeah, and I think if you remember that famous product presentation of the first iPhone back in whenever that was, 2006, I think, something along those lines, when Steve Jobs was on stage and said, well, it's an iPad, but it's a phone as well, and it's a computer as well. So it's an iPod, it's a phone, it's a computer, it's got all of that. And he made his jokes about the BlackBerry where you had to type and all of that, and how can you combine these things and all of that. And I think that was truly innovation, because it was basically merging existing technologies into one device, which actually changed the way we all interact. So there's many more examples, but that's probably the one most widely recognized by everyone who's listening.
Right. It's a great example to kind of anchor the conversation around. So we talked about what innovation is. What, in your mind, isn't innovation?
Well, my career has been in advertising, marketing for many, many years. And when I say the introduction of something new like the Apple iPhone is true innovation, then obviously a different company launches something similar, like Samsung with the Galaxy smartphones shortly after. That's actually not real innovation, at least not at the first moment. I think as the category shaped up over the years, there's been many innovations that Samsung and the Galaxy portfolio has brought to the world. But initially, I think the innovation actually truly belongs to Apple and the iPhone. But just a new feature, I think, is just not, unless it's a killer feature.
Right.
I think it's got to be more profound than that. So something new must be really something new.
Right. So Apple sort of invented a category.
Correct.
And participating in that category, after that, you may invent some new things to compete differently or to add features to it. But the innovation, you're saying, is the innovation was sort of the creation of this category that didn't exist the day before.
Correct.
That makes a lot of sense. It allows you to separate innovation from invention. Because I think if you look in the last 10 years, Samsung has probably been more inventive than Apple in terms of what they've done with cameras and some of the other hardware. But the innovation at the heart of it belongs to Apple in terms of taking us from the push button phone to the slate form factor that we have today with computers inside.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's well put. How does that translate into sort of how you think about marketing and advertising? It's a great product-based example. Is there a similar example from the world of advertising that you can think of in terms of someone who changed the game and really kind of created something new in that space?
Well, I think in advertising, there's the old saying that we've all seen it before. It just comes in different shapes and forms and colors.
Right.
And I think that's true. I mean, there's only a few fundamental approaches that have been there. And whenever any creative folks got to something unique that actually worked well with the brand they were advertising and in the media they were using to advertise, I think then there has been some breakthrough work. And we see that every year in Cannes, and we see that at the Effies and so on and so forth. But in terms of true breakthroughs, I mean, I would argue the advertising industry is pretty traditional.
Yeah.
There have been a few, and those have been obviously in the world of media. I mean, the internet changed things like by a factor of I don't know what.
Yeah.
I mean, I still remember those days. I was working on a car account here in Europe, and we were the ones who were actually developing the first configurator for a car brand. This was like, I think, 97 or so.
Wow.
I mean, in today's world, can you imagine? The only thing that was kind of your product information and whether it was the color you liked and the engine and so on and so forth and the gadgets, you had to work your way through a big catalog and figure out which model allowed which options and so on and so forth. I mean, the internet in terms of marketing and democratizing access to consumers obviously has been a huge game changer, and lots of innovative elements of how to communicate and in which to communicate with people have emerged from them. It's probably the biggest change since printing was developed.
Wow. Yeah, that really puts it in context. I hadn't thought about it that way. It's probably its biggest shift is printing.
Yeah, I mean, look at it. I think my kids, who are in their late 20s and early 30s, are probably the last generation who ever can remember that there were times when you had a map when you were driving from one place A to place B, and you were always concerned that you miss street X because you just didn't see the sign early enough. And now Google tells you kind of where the traffic jam happens and what's the best way around it. And you can tell your people that you're visiting that you're going to be 15 minutes late because there's a traffic jam on the motorway and so on and so forth. I mean, think about it. All of this is just like 20 years ago.
That's unbelievable when you put it in that context. As we think about the advertising industry and the impact of the internet on it, I'm a product guy. I grew up career-wise at Procter & Gamble in R&D making products. And so we always had this viewpoint of we were consumer-centric and we were building things that solved problems for the consumer and the core benefits and all those things. And then we'd build it, test it with consumers, and then hand it over to the marketing team, the advertising folks to go do what they do. I feel like there's been innovation in that whole process. I feel like it's much more integrated and seamless than it used to be, say, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, it was probably 3 silos inside an organization, and you handed over stuff, and then you saw the end product pretty much at the same time as the consumer did. So you were watching TV, and all of a sudden, oops, that's what they've done out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas I think today that is much more integrated, because obviously with the opportunities that the internet is offering to target consumers more directly, we're not in the age of the singular consumer, but you can target obviously groups much closer and much more direct and make sure the benefits hit that consumer exactly when he or she is in the mood.
Yeah.
Considering it and not just when you got other things on your mind. And yeah, that's part of where the innovation has gone to. But obviously we've also seen with the rise of social media, we've seen lots of benefits, but we've also seen some dark moments. So,
So true.
Innovation usually is not a virgin thing.
Right. Exactly. Doesn't have an inherent goodness or badness to it. Just it's something new. It solves a problem, but it could create other unintended consequences.
Yes.
So I'd like to talk a bit about your career and how the role innovation has played in sort of shaping and molding your career. Can you talk to me a bit about that?
Yes. So we've all already noticed that my career has been predominantly in advertising. I spent more than 20 years with McCann Erickson in lots of roles of being in the management of local markets here in Germany or running global accounts or regional accounts across Europe. done that for 20 years. And as I mentioned, like the first configurator was one element of innovation. Or I still remember we did the first billboard in Russia back then. That was 1990, whatever, one, I think.
The first billboard.
First billboard of a Western brand in Russia. And as we're talking about it, I mean, there's no more billboards of Western brands in Russia today.
Right, yeah.
Probably won't be for a long time.
Right.
Lots of innovation. But I think these 20 years working in global advertising have allowed me to actually jump ship back in 2011 when a former colleague of mine, Steve Wolford, called me up one night and said, listen, I'm planning to build up a new kind of agency and actually an industry first type of agency, a joint venture with the client. And would you want to be part of this and build the organization for the European and Asian markets initially? What happened then was exactly probably what happens with most innovations is the person on the other end of the phone actually goes like, are you serious?
Right, exactly.
Is this a joke? I mean,
there's a moment of disbelief. Yeah,
absolutely. And he said, obviously, no. It's damn serious. This is kind of where I'm at, and this is kind of what I think. And I was like, okay, Steve, we worked together before, and we had a pretty good way of doing things and getting things done back in the day. And I said, so it's the benefit of your business plan. I want to see it I want to see it in writing.
Right.
Said, yeah, that's fine. I'll get it to you straight after the call, which he did, which was late at my time. So next day I looked at the business plan and I was like, okay, this is serious. This is real.
Yeah.
We talked again the next evening and said, okay, now there's a few bits and bobs in the business plan that need a bit of work, but the general direction was pretty straightforward and pretty good. And so we created this first advertising agency that was half owned by the client, which was Jaguar Land Rover.
Wow.
And they wanted us to do the advertising for the Jaguar brand globally initially. And so we started with 4 agencies. And those were based in Los Angeles, in London, Frankfurt, and Shanghai. And I can tell you one thing, if you buy into such an idea and you get the client approvals and so client/partner, because it was a joint venture.
Right.
The one thing you notice when you get that approval is, okay, it usually comes with a straight deadline. And theirs was like, okay, this is whatever, the middle of February 2011, we would like you to start on June 1st.
Wow. Like operating as the new entity.
Operating as.
Wow.
And at that time, we were just 5 guys and a business plan and a passion and an idea.
Right.
And then it got real very, very quickly.
Yeah. Because
the one moment you're excited because, okay, now it's really happening. The next morning you wake up and it's like, okay. I mean, we actually needed 20 people in each office. So hire 4 times 20 people in 4 countries in which you don't have an office or not even have a company yet.
Wow. And have them coordinated and operating in 3 months.
Yeah, and bring them into their jobs.
Right.
It was interesting because some of us did it like, okay, I work together well with X, Y, and Z. So X, Y, and Z, would you want to be part of this? Similar to how Steve called me.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually thought, I've been with McCann's for 22 years. And I was excited to do something new. Mm-hmm. And one thing was clear to me, it wouldn't be really new if I would bring in the boys.
Right.
So innovation also comes with bringing in diversity in thinking and experience and background.
Yeah, new voices. Yeah.
I didn't just want everybody who's been on the same ship that I have been for years and try to do the same thing but different.
Right.
I thought to do it different, it needs difference. So that's the way we did it. And I still remember to this day, having the interviews with all these people. Initially, I was a bit scared. I was like, okay, let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
Because you just don't know. But after having done, 10 interviews on a day for a week, I said on the weekend, I said, look, don't count me in for the afternoon. I'll just need to make sure I can put those candidates, see what's the right mix. And my initial thought was this would take 6-7 hours to actually go through all of this.
Right.
And I was wrong because it actually took 1.5.
Wow.
And the reason it took 1.5 was very simple because there was one question that we asked during these interviews. And that was the question that divided the ones who were the right people to join versus the others. who were probably not the right people to join at this moment. They might have perhaps been interesting later, because the question was not a question that I raised, was a question that these people raised. Everybody raised the question, but the answer was different all the time. The question was, do you have a job description? And my response was, well, we neither have an office yet, got a company yet. We have an idea about the functions that we need at which levels of seniority, but we're actually interested in people who are interested in writing the job description in the first 3 months.
Right.
And there was a group of people that could not get their heads around this, right? And so just the conversation about this facet made it clear whether they would be the right people for a startup or not. And that's why I'm saying some of them actually joined in year 2 or 3 or 4, but they were definitely not the right people for day one. But there were a lot of people who were the right people for day one. And so we were very happy. And I mean, for the office that I started, from those 20 people, I think 18 were a perfect fit, 2 weren't. But I thought that was a pretty good result for convincing people to get on a mission. And I think that's the critical part. So what was the reason that convinced them? So our mission was to restore the Jaguar brand. And that was something many, many folks felt very much attached to. And so it got us a lot of people who were behind this mission. And that made it easy for us to build a company culture that was second to none. And so Spark 44, which is the name of the agency, could open its doors on the 1st of June in 2011. And 80 people were there. And it all happened. And the rest is history. I mean, the company grew in its first 3 years to actually 6 offices and 250 people. And as our joint venture partner was Jaguar Land Rover, and the initial agreement had been that this is not going to be just a Jaguar agency. So we would open the doors once the operation was solid and robust to other brands. And like 3 years later, we said, well, we feel we're in a good shape. We can now open the doors for other clients. And our joint venture partners at the time said, we think so too. Why don't you just take over the Land Rover brand?
Wow.
And then we said, okay, there's not going to be other clients outside. But actually, it means tripling the agency in just 6 months.
Wow. With no business development.
You could argue the business development was the 3 years before.
Was the performance, yes, for sure. Yes, yeah.
The performance, because in the meantime, we had won the global Effie for the Jaguar Super Bowl campaign in the US with the Good to Be Bad at the time. You remember probably?
I do.
Yes. And so I think that's the power of great work. This was 2013. We are now at 2022, so it's 9 years ago. And if I mention it, you just,
Yeah.
It was very powerful. And then to this day, to be pretty much a defining campaign for the brand. Some people say history repeats itself. So the moment we got the green light for the Land Rover brand, similar story, the largest of the incumbent agencies said, well, actually, if you really want to leave, then we'll close the doors on June 30th. So by July 1st, there won't be any more service. So again, same thing. Can you please set up the teams for the Land Rover brand between early March and the 1st of July? The only difference was in the initial phase, it was 4 offices with 20 people each.
Right.
In the second phase, it was an additional 12 offices with 500 people altogether.
Wow.
And with a straight deadline, because the operations had to be capable of running in 4 months later. So that was probably the most intense phase of how innovation shaped my career.
Yeah, that definitely would be, I would imagine.
I mean, you are from your Procter & Gamble days. At the end of the day, it's all about the team that you have and is capable of doing. And I remember Steve and I had this conversation because he wasn't so sure whether this was a good thing. And I said, well, would we rather want somebody else to do the job or not? So that was the first question. We all said, no, we don't. So then the next question that was on the table was, how can we preserve the culture that made this agency great? That's obviously the biggest topic. So we were lucky because for the 12 agencies we had to set up, I think in 9 of those, we had point account people in various markets where we didn't have an office. So those had been dyed in the wool with the culture and the approach and the ambition and the passion. And so we felt they really qualified to step up and become the general manager in these agencies. And
I see.
And so that got us a head start, which was different, obviously, to like 3 years before, where it was just the 5 of us.
Right. So you were able to sort of promote folks into leadership that already understood the culture, knew what was important, and could guide and shape it as it grew.
Yeah. And fast forward a few years later, Steve resigned and his retirement.
Yeah.
So I became CEO. And when I left, I stepped down from the position at the end of 2019. Something happened that actually got me to write the first book, which is Building Corporate Soul. And what happened was, as you can imagine, I was the last of the founding team that was leaving. Mm-hmm. So people were quite concerned for a number of reasons. And so I received countless farewell messages, and they went much, much deeper than you would normally expect them.
Right.
So people were really concerned about kind of the next phase, but people also felt this was a moment to say thank you in a different way. Many of them said, part of the book, you've actually made us accomplish things that we never thought possible. And for me, actually, I always thought it was possible because I saw what capabilities those people had.
Right.
They weren't sure whether their capabilities were as good as I thought they were, so they're afraid.
Right.
But if you look at that, you very quickly get to a place where you think about what is required to drive innovation and what needs to happen. I mean, one of the guys in Dubai actually created the first configurator on Instagram.
Oh.
They talk innovation. So again, obviously, it's not like the fully fledged one that you have on your computer.
Right, of course not.
But it gets you to a certain place from which buying decisions are made much easier. And I think there's 5 things that you actually need, or 5 traits, if you like. You got to provide psychological safety. People need to feel they got your back. Mm-hmm. That's critical. And if you work in product development, same thing. I mean, you come up with crazy stuff, you're like, okay, let's see.
Right.
And you need that boss, that leader that actually pushes you even further to then get to a place where like, okay, I never thought we would do this, but here we are.
Here we are, yeah.
So psychological safety is critical. You need to create an environment that is highly collaborative, very, very important. As like diversity in the early days of the industry first agency approach was a critical means, it stayed exactly that way. We wanted to operate differently on a global scale. You got to be sure about your hierarchy or non-hierarchy.
Right.
We did an experiment at the beginning, and that failed actually, because we said, well, we don't want job titles. And we had a difficult time in convincing everybody, because it's easy, and I have to confess, I mean, it's easy if you're the founder on the management team to say you don't need a job title. But if you're like 27 and in your first or second job and you want to show progress to the world and not just say you're working in sales or in customer service.
Right.
You need some kind of thing there. So we had tons of discussions on what's the right amount of job titles to there.
I can imagine.
And then you need the willingness to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know that from product development, you just got to try.
Yeah.
And as you have that willingness to experiment, it only works if you have a tolerance for failure, because not everything will work. But you can be sure, and the good to be bad example is a great case. Is like, if you got that tolerance for failure, every now and then something great happens. And this was the moment at that point. And there were many more. So if you celebrate those moments, not just a great campaign, but all those little moments that happen along the way, where innovation in how you do business, or how you manage projects, or how you leverage different things to create something new, then I think you're on a journey to actually bring people to this promise of the fun fact in any organization, because you can create something new. It's something that everybody values, not just the leaders. I think when you talk to young people inside any organization, it's very often the innovation project that's the fun part.
Right.
Because everybody knows certain things won't work. So you can just try, but whatever project 6 will work, and it'll be phenomenal.
That's well said. I think you're exactly right in terms of the failure tolerance and the experimentation mindset. I love all 5. Those last 2 really speak to me because of my background and things I've seen as an engineer that moved into consulting. I expected the world to be different, but it's not that different. The broader business world, you still need to have that space, just as you said, for experimentation and the tolerance for failure, because no one knows we're all guessing.
Yeah.
We're all saying, I think this will work. And anybody who tells you differently is deluding themselves. Those last two really resonate with me personally. And the framework of all five, I think, is a great backdrop for culture. How would you set a mindset for folks to really feel comfortable innovating and see it as valued?
As the book's title or the leadership book is called Building Corporate Soul. When I get asked, I usually say, well, every company has a culture, only few got soul. So the real question then becomes, how do you get there?
Right.
As I said, you can't not have a company without culture.
Yeah.
So the question is, what do you do with it? And from own experience and from the book, I can only say culture is something that needs to be reflected on by leadership, and ideally very early on. So there's a framework in the book, which is called the soul system. And it's got 3 levels. Level 1 is the shared purpose. Shared purpose because it needs to be shared by the leadership team and with all stakeholders. Then there's the shared understanding. The shared understanding, to me, encapsulates the usual suspects of vision, mission, values. And I've added a 4th one, which I believe is fundamental critical, which is spirit. To me, spirit is the intended culture. So what is management consider? What's the culture we want to see? Because at the end of the day, management can decide lots of things, but it can only create an environment for the culture to emerge. If you want to know about the culture in any business, never ask the CEO, ask the receptionist, or ask the driver, or ask the janitor, or ask whoever. So the 3rd level then are the shared behaviors, because they actually make the culture. And if you have the purpose and the understanding and the behaviors connected, well connected, there's an integrity between those 3, you actually are getting close to being a company with soul. And the companies with soul outperform their peers. So when I finished writing the book, I looked at all the analysis and all the research that I had been going through over the past few months. And one thing occurred to me, it's usually been the same companies that always stood up as great examples. So I looked at all the research and then gave a weighting to those and created the Soul Index, which is a performance ranking of companies. And it's 75% of that index are based on employee data. So employee engagement, employee satisfaction, but also employee approval of the CEO.
Interesting.
And when that ranking was complete, I asked someone at a bank that I work with, can you please do me a favor and calculate the portfolio returns over a period of time? And when they did that, I knew that it would be good because 60% are tech companies, and they have been doing great for a number of years. But I wasn't so sure whether it really was so good overall. And so I was really, really, really excited when I got the results, because that index between 2016 and 2020 beat NASDAQ by nearly 20 percentage points. So Soul Index was like 199% return. NASDAQ did 180 over those 5 years. And Dow Jones and S&P were in the 70s or 80%. So all were doing great in the grand scheme of things. This was just from another world, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think when you look into shared purpose and shared understanding and shared behaviors, you can translate those 3 by the 3 Bs, as I call them. Shared purpose to me is about being, shared understanding is about believing, and shared behavior is about belonging. So being, believing, and belonging.
Yeah.
And if you worked out 2 questions for each of those that leaders can ask themselves, they sound simple, so similar to your what is innovation? On being, on the shared purpose, the 2 questions are, why am I here? And why are we here?
Interesting. You can look at those answers side by side probably and get insights just from the comparison of those 2.
I think to get to the answer is not an easy feat.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you here? Yes, there are the quick answers that you can shoot out. But if you start reflecting on those, it ain't that quick. So why am I here? Why are we here? On the being, shared purpose, on believing, the shared understanding, vision, mission, values, and spirit. What do we believe in? And how do we shape belief in others? Right? So how can we as leaders make sure that everybody else inside the organization, or our suppliers and our customers, or the communities and the investors and what have you, how do we make sure that they believe in what we think the dream of the company is? And then you get into the shared behaviors, and it's all about belonging, right? And you've probably seen that McKinsey study from last October, which was about the Great Resignation. Why are people leaving? The number one reason why people are leaving is because they don't feel any sense of belonging in their organization, in their company. And so the topic of belonging is so critical.
Yes.
It's actually the one topic that separates the boys from the men, if you like, because the companies with culture and the companies with soul, because you can get the strategy right and you can get the vision right, and your intended culture, the spirit is there, and it reads nicely, it's all great. At the end of the day, if it doesn't happen inside the organization, it's all just fig leaf PowerPoint, right? And it doesn't get you anywhere. So shared behaviors, belonging, what does it feel like to belong here? And how do we create belonging for others? These are the two questions for leaders to reflect on. And once you get through those, and I haven't seen anyone who, after hearing those questions, like 2 minutes later had an answer. You don't.
No.
Because it's heavy stuff. But it's worth thinking this through, because you look into research. There's O.C. Tanner in the US who've got their global culture report, global culture index, that basically says that companies with a thriving culture, which to me is synonymous with a company with soul, have 13 times more engaged employees, have a double likelihood of increased revenues. Employees in these companies are 3 times less affected by burnout situations, and the companies themselves are 3 times less affected by potential layoffs.
Oh, interesting.
Happy days.
Yeah, that's a win-win for everyone, right?
Yeah, and so this whole conversation that often happens is like, oh, we haven't got enough time to care about our culture, is just bullshit.
Yeah.
It is, because it's actually the other way around. If you spend the time on the culture, you will see higher performance, you will see higher commitment, you will see happier employees who usually create happier customers, and they're more healthy. So you don't have to worry about them being sick and all these things. And if you start thinking about it, there's a lot of benefits that come there. And hence, my personal vision is to make soulless companies a thing of the past, because I think companies with soul are not just better business and better financial performance, they're actually a better contributor to society as a whole. And to me, I think the time has come.
Well said. Well said. I think you could probably launch a podcast on any one of those 6 questions.
Probably. Probably.
Ralf, this has been so helpful. Before I let you get away, I want to ask if there's any advice you might have for innovators out there.
Yeah, I think, as we said, it's the introduction of something new. And you've been working in product development at Procter & Gamble, which is a company that is pretty good at product development.
Yeah.
And I think you probably have noticed, as you were going through focus groups and testing and what have you, that sometimes people at a concept level were not able to get what you had on your mind, because it's very difficult for people to understand what they don't understand or what they haven't seen before.
Right.
So I think if you're looking at innovation and say, so how and where can I innovate? I think the best starting point is to look at the pain points of your industry. Our joint venture advertising agency joint venture was looking at the pain point of transparency. Clients were always concerned about transparency. As a joint venture, you've got an open book policy because your joint venture partner sees everything.
Right, exactly.
And all of us came from agencies where there was not really an intent for clients to see everything.
I can understand that.
We turned that around. So transparency was the pain point and the worry about not getting the best. And so we said we need to be better, faster, cheaper in that order. And by doing all of these 3, we would create a better relationship, which obviously was the ultimate testament, was the growth to 1,200 people at the end and 18 offices. So the pain point of the industry, if you're really honest with it, is a simple analogy to the question of why am I here, is what keeps people up at night in customers, any stakeholder that's relevant. If you have an understanding of what it is, like, I mean, your need states at Procter & Gamble, what problem do we want to solve here?
Right.
Clear about that, then you got a chance to innovate. Then there's something that you think you have a better solution for, well, then go about it. Chances are you're onto something, and if you find a way to explain it to people and declare it to people so convincingly that they immediately get it, you're there.
That's the goal, right? And it's a tough mountain to climb to really close that gap between what's in your head and what's in the other person's head.
Yeah, it's a tough mountain to climb, but it's actually a very rewarding mountain to climb because as I remember getting these messages when I stepped down, I was actually very moved by those. And I put 3 in the book because I felt they were very moving, actually. So I believe the reward to me has been how people that I work with valued what I helped them to do differently overall. So the legacy that I left behind with Spark 44 to me wasn't 1,200 people, 100 million plus turnover and 18 offices. That's all been there, and I enjoyed every moment. But actually the reward has been, or the legacy I think has been, to have been one of a leadership team that was able to create an inspired community and a performance culture that was human-centric all the way through. And yes, we've also done our mistakes. Not everything was perfect, but I think overall, I think we've created a lot of innovation in that industry, and many consider the agency as a role model and have taken parts and copied them, and that's a great honor, actually.
Yeah, it's the sincerest form of flattery, right?
Absolutely.
Ralf, this has been such a treat, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about innovation, the cornerstone of your work in terms of making sure all companies have a soul. That is, I think, it's so important just in the world of business, in the interactions of human beings. And I think until you get things like that right, it's hard to even start to have productive conversations around innovation and how you start to think about the level of collaboration, as you mentioned, and the level of cooperation and thinking that innovation requires. If you don't have that core right, it's just not going to be sustainable. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And I can't wait I've got one book, I'm going to get the other one. I'm looking forward to reading the second one as well.
Thank you very much, Jared. It's been my pleasure today.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.